Imagine waking up one day and discovering that you now control land your family has owned for nearly 700 years. Castles, coastlines, tens of thousands of acres of farmland. A private fortune worth over £1 billion, generating tens of millions every single year. That's not a fantasy. That's exactly what happened to Prince William the moment his father became king. But what nobody expected was how quickly the new owner would start making changes that would quietly push people out of his inner circle, including someone very close to Queen Camilla herself. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, we dig into the real stories behind the British royal family, the money, the power, and the decisions that rarely make headlines but reveal everything about who's really in charge. And this story is one of the most revealing yet. Let's get into it. On September 8, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral Castle after 70 years on the throne. The world focused on the funeral, the mourning, and the coronation that would follow. But behind the scenes, something else was happening. Titles were shifting automatically. Property was changing hands. And within moments of his father becoming King Charles III, Prince William, then 40 years old, became the 24th Duke of Cornwall. That title isn't ceremonial. It comes with one of the largest private estates in the world, the Duchy of Cornwall, a landholding created all the way back in 1337 by King Edward III for his son, Edward the Black Prince. The rule has stayed the same for nearly 7 centuries. The duchy automatically passes to the monarch's eldest son, the heir to the throne. Nearly 700 years later, William became only the latest in a very long line of men to inherit it. And the numbers involved are staggering. The duchy is valued at more than £1 billion. It stretches across roughly 130,000 acres, spanning 23 counties in England and Wales, farmland, historic buildings, rental cottages, commercial property, and almost the entire archipelago of the Isles of Scilly off the Cornish coast. It isn't a ceremonial title with a nice house attached. It is, functionally, a very large private company, and William is now its owner and chief decision-maker. The income that flows from it is enormous. According to the Dutch's own integrated annual report, William's distributable surplus for the 2024 to 2025 financial year came to roughly £22.9 million, around $30 million. The year before that, his first full year running the estate, it was even higher, at £23.6 million. That money isn't a personal salary in the traditional sense. It's meant to cover William, Kate, and their 3 children's official, charitable, and private expenses, since as a senior working royal William doesn't draw a conventional wage. And notably, the duchy itself is structured so that it doesn't pay corporation tax, though William has chosen, voluntarily, to pay income tax on what he receives, a practice his father maintained for decades before him. That's the scale of what changed hands. Now here's where it gets interesting, because owning an estate this size means William isn't just inheriting land. He's inheriting relationships, staff, contracts, and decades of decisions made by his father. And almost immediately, he began undoing some of them. In July 2024, the Duchy of Cornwall published its annual report, and buried in the financial disclosures was a detail that royal watchers picked up on instantly. Annabel Elliot, Queen Camilla's younger sister, was no longer being paid by the duchy. For nearly 20 years, Elliot had worked as the estate's go-to interior designer. Then Prince Charles brought her on shortly after marrying Camilla in 2005, and from there she quietly shaped the interiors of duchy-owned properties across Cornwall, Wales, and the Isles of Scilly, holiday cottages, estate offices, even a 20-bedroom pub redevelopment in the Poundbury project in Dorset. Over those 2 decades, according to the Telegraph, she was paid several £100,000 in total, with individual annual payments that varied year to year. Public filings show figures ranging from roughly £19,000 up toward £82,000, plus separate reimbursements for furniture and furnishing she sourced for the properties. Elliot, now in her mid-70s, is a respected figure in British interior design in her own right, known for blending traditional English country house style with a more livable, modern sensibility. She isn't a minor character in Camilla's life. She's her closest sibling, someone the Queen is regularly photographed alongside at public events. So when the 2024 annual report showed no further payments to her after the 2022 to 2023 financial year, it raised eyebrows. Sources who spoke to the Telegraph were careful to frame the decision gently. saying William would simply no longer be employing her, and that it reflected nothing negative about the quality of her work. The suggestion, according to those same sources, was that her design work across the estate's properties was essentially complete, and that the Duchess's own staff had learned enough from her over the years to continue the work internally. On paper, that's a mundane, almost boring explanation, a contractor's role winding down because the job is finished. But context is everything in the royal world, and the context here is hard to ignore. This wasn't just any outgoing contractor. This was the sister of the Queen Consort, someone who had held a paid position inside the family business for 2 decades, quietly removed within roughly 2 years of William taking control. And it wasn't an isolated move. Around the same period, William brought in people from his own circle to take on roles at the estate, including friends who also serve as godparents to his children, stepping into positions that had previously been filled by people connected to his father's era. The pattern was hard to miss, out with the associates tied to Charles and Camilla's household, in with people William trusts personally. Here's where it's worth pausing and being honest about what we actually know versus what's speculation, because a lot of headlines ran with this story in the most dramatic way possible. What we know for certain, Annabel Elliot stopped receiving payments from the Duchy of Cornwall around the time William took over as Duke. That's documented in the estate's own public financial filings. We also know that sources briefed the Telegraph that this was framed internally as a natural winding down of her role, not a punitive removal. What we don't have is any on-the-record statement from Camilla, from Elliot herself, or from Buckingham Palace describing anger, betrayal, or rift. In fact, just days after the story broke in July 2024, Camilla and her sister were photographed together at Wimbledon, seated side by side, looking every bit as close as they've always appeared in public. If there was a private falling out over the payroll decision, it certainly hasn't shown up in how the two sisters present themselves publicly. So it's fair to describe this as a pointed, symbolically loaded decision by William, a new owner reshaping who benefits from an estate he now controls, in a way that happens to exclude a family member of his stepmother. It's less fair to claim, without evidence, that it triggered some kind of open feud. The more accurate read, based on what's actually been reported, is quieter than that, a changing of the guard, executed through paperwork rather than confrontation, that nonetheless sends an unmistakable signal about where loyalty and control now sit. And that signal matters, because of who William is and what he grew up watching. To understand why even a modest financial decision, we're talking about payments in the tens of thousands of pounds a year, a rounding error against £1 billion estate, became a major story, you have to understand the emotional backdrop. William grew up watching his mother, Princess Diana, endure a painful marriage that was shadowed by his father's relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, an affair Charles publicly acknowledged in a televised interview in 1994. Diana's pain during those years was well documented and deeply affected both of her sons. When she died in a car crash in August 1997, William was just 15 and Harry was 12, and both boys were thrust into a very public form of grief that shaped the rest of their lives. Despite that history, William has, by most accounts, made a genuine effort to build a working relationship with Camilla. He attended his father's wedding to her in 2005 and has appeared alongside her at royal engagements ever since without any public sign of hostility. Accepting Camilla as a stepmother, though, is a different matter from extending the same warmth to her wider family within a business context, and the Duchy of Cornwall is, at the end of the day, a business, not a family gathering. It employs staff, manages tenants, signs contracts, and answers to its own financial reporting standards. William, as its owner, is under no obligation to continue any arrangement his father put in place, regardless of who benefits from it. Seen that way, removing Elliot from the payroll looks less like a personal slight and more like an assertion of independence, a new duke drawing a clear line between my father's era and my era. It's the kind of decision monarchs and their heirs have made for centuries, reviewing the books, trimming who's on the payroll, and staffing up with people they trust. The Duchy of Cornwall, as significant as it is really just the first chapter. It's a preview of a much larger transfer of wealth and property that will eventually land on William's shoulders when Charles dies and William becomes king. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away, 2 major properties moved into Charles's hands as his personal, privately owned estates, not crown property, but assets he inherited outright from his mother, who in turn inherited them from her father, King George VI. The first is Sandringham House in Norfolk, the family's private country retreat, distinct from state-owned palaces like Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. The second is Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands, spanning more than 53,000 acres, originally purchased for Queen Victoria by Prince Albert in the 19th century. Both estates are deeply symbolic to the royal family. They are where the family gathers at Christmas, where prime ministers have been received informally, and where, as we saw in September 2022, monarchs have spent their final days. As Charles' wife, Camilla currently shares access to both properties and the lifestyle that comes with them. But neither estate belongs to her. When Charles dies, ownership of Sandringham and Balmoral passes not to Camilla, but to William, exactly as the Duchy of Cornwall did. Camilla's own position, according to royal commentators who track succession planning, would shift significantly at that point. She would likely take the title of Queen Dowager and would retain properties and support tied specifically to her marriage, including Clarence House, valued at roughly $72 million, and Highgrove House, valued at around $39 million, both of which she and Charles have used as private residences. She is not expected to retain any ownership claim over Sandringham or Balmoral, since those pass directly through the line of the monarchy to the next heir. Interestingly, Camilla has already taken steps that suggest she's thinking about her own long-term arrangements. She sold her private countryside home, Ray Mill House in Wiltshire, a property she owned before marrying Charles and had described as a personal retreat. For Annabel Elliott, all of this adds a layer of uncertainty to an already complicated picture. She's already lost her Duchy of Cornwall income. Buckingham Palace has confirmed she still has some connection to the royal household, and reports suggest she continues to do design work at Sandringham, which for now remains under Charles's control. But once William becomes king and inherits Sandringham directly, whatever role Elliot still has there will depend entirely on whether William chooses to keep her involved, and based on his track record with the duchy, that's far from guaranteed. Step back from the individual headlines, and the real story here isn't about a grudge or family fight. It's about what happens when enormous, centuries-old wealth changes hands from one generation to the next, and a new owner starts making his own calls. William inherited an estate worth well over £1 billion, spanning tens of thousands of acres and generating tens of millions of pounds a year, and within roughly 2 years of taking control, he had already reshaped who benefits from it. He removed a long-serving contractor connected to his stepmother's family and brought in people from his own trusted circle instead. Whether you read that as ruthless efficiency, generational change, or something more personal probably depends on how much weight you put on the family history involved. But the documented facts are fairly modest. A duchy contractor role that ended around the time ownership changed hands, framed by insiders as a natural conclusion rather than a firing, with no public sign, so far, of any real rift between Camilla and William. What's coming next is far bigger than a design contract, though. Sandringham, Balmoral, the Crown Estate, and a private fortune built up over generations are all waiting in the wings for William, whenever that transition eventually happens. And when it does, we'll get a much clearer picture of exactly how far William is willing to go in shaping the monarchy in his own image, and how much room, if any, he leaves for the family his father built around Camilla. What do you think? Is William simply doing what any new owner would do with an inheritance this size, or does trimming his stepmother's family from the payroll send the wrong message at a moment when the monarchy could use all the goodwill it can get? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this breakdown useful, hit like so more people can find it. Subscribe if you're new, and we'll see you in the next one.